Welcome, everybody, to the Reconnect Self podcast, the show that helps you rediscover what ultimately brings you joy. My name is Scott, and I am your host. I am a filmmaker, and I'm here with my wife, Tracy. Tracy is a counsellor of some, what did we say last time, 15, 20 years?
At least 20.
It's been a while. How are you, babe?
Well, normally I say I'm good, but today I'm really exhausted. I did a really hard gym class this morning, and they made us do a 500-metre row, which just killed me for the whole rest of the class, so I've been whinging ever since.
Yeah, you have. I was not going to bring it up, but since you mentioned it.
Oh, my face has finally stopped being red, so that's good.
Yes.
I think it was red for about an hour and a half.
Yeah. And it's taken me ages to set this up because for eagle-eared listeners, it might sound a little bit different. Obviously, for those watching on YouTube, you can see our little new setup. We've got pink microphones. We have a little mixing desk, so we're feeling very professional.
Well, more so than before.
Now, today's topic is vulnerability, and we thought it's a very important topic. I think anyone who's seen the Brené Brown TED Talk from a long time ago, which is millions and millions of people know the power of vulnerability, but we thought maybe it would be a good idea to show that power sort of firsthand and use you as our subject.
Yes.
And we thought that could do two things. One is show the power of being vulnerable, but to give listeners a bit more of an insight into your life.
Yeah.
And what shaped you over all these years. And we're going to start from pretty young and we'll work our way through. So this might be a two-parter.
Yeah, probably will be.
How are you feeling about it all?
There's times when I've thought about this and I felt like, oh yeah, that's fine, I can do that. My clients do that all the time. And then other times I'm like, oh, am I really going to share everything? So I guess I'm probably a little bit nervous, like what my clients would feel like before coming in and sharing their story with me when they've never met me. But I guess for me, it's going to go to more than just a therapist.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. I think that, obviously I know all these stories, so it's not going to be news to me. But I think, when you put yourself out there, sort of doing a show like this and being the host and being the expert, like everyone thinks, oh, what a perfect life and blah, blah, blah. And I think this will give people a good insight into, you've had some tough things that you've had to deal with. And those things have shaped you into the amazing person that you are today. So you have your tissues, don't you?
I do.
All right. Well, why don't we start with maybe just a few general questions about vulnerability, and then we'll move into your story. And I was trying to think, have we done any of your story before? I think there might be bits and pieces that we might have mentioned, but we've never done it quite like this.
Yeah.
So I still think it'll be new for people.
Yep.
All right, well, I guess the first general question is, why is vulnerability so powerful?
Because when people sort of strip away all their defences and they bring down their barriers and they actually just share things that they're feeling and things that they may be struggling with, it allows other people to see what's going on for them, and it allows for greater connection. And I feel that when people do put their walls down, people care for people.
Yeah.
People want to support that person. Back in the day when I used to work for an agency where we ran camps, we used to take these teenagers and we would have these topics. We'd break them into small groups, and we would say have 5 or 6 kids in each group, and we would talk about things like bullying and friendship, or grief and loss, or families and relationships. And I found that the kids that kind of just skated through and didn't really share very much, they didn't really connect as well with all the other participants. But for those kids that really just opened up and shared some tough struggles, the connections that I saw that were formed, they were little lifelong friends that they would really bond over that weekend, and they'd come away feeling so supported and so cared about. And it used to just warm my heart. I loved it. But that was from vulnerability. That was just from them opening up and sharing things about themselves that were hard.
Yeah, it made me think you have to be very brave to be vulnerable.
Oh, you have to be so brave. And in fact, this is not necessarily saying that you have to cry when you're vulnerable, although obviously that's a time where tears would often come. But people often feel like they're strong when they kind of just push through and get through and put on a brave face and all of those sort of things. No, that's not strength. That's actually not strength. The strength is sitting in those uncomfortable emotions, sitting there knowing that you could be judged or you're not knowing how you're going to be received and doing it anyway. That is true strength.
Yeah, that's very true. When I think about, when I was dealing with anxiety and having those spells of long periods of anxiety, and you sort of learn that if you have the bravery and the inner strength just to sit through them, to not ignore the feelings, to just know that you're going to be okay, you're going to get through it. It's very difficult to do, but once you've trained yourself, because I feel like I trained myself in that.
Yes, you definitely have.
Like to actually just sit with it. I think that, it's really powerful, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of work, it takes a bit of commitment, but you can do it. So why is it so hard for people to be vulnerable? Because I don't think it comes easy.
Because they don't always know how they're going to be received and if they're going to be supported. And in fact, that's one of the biggest struggles that my couples often face, is that one person might be being vulnerable and the other person doesn't come down, low enough, or they don't soften enough to meet that person in that vulnerable space. And so then if they don't meet their partner there, then the partner doesn't stay there. The partner doesn't feel like they're being received well or supported in that moment. So they'll often put their walls back up, kind of close back over, and then maybe even escalate because they're so annoyed that their partner didn't support them. So it's a very important skill to have, not only to be able to be vulnerable, to support someone in that vulnerable state.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I was going to think before we go into your story, one of the things that you've had to conquer in doing this podcast, in starting social media, like you're not, doesn't come naturally. I think it is now, but certainly at the beginning, didn't come naturally to you. It's not really something you wanted to do. It was actually me who forced you to do this show.
And the social media. You forced me to do the social media too.
Yes, in the most loving way. So I guess my question is, how did you get through that? Like, how did you... Because you...
I used to feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at any of my social media, you'll see back in my posts, I used to just do photos. And then you started saying to me, people are following you. You need to be in those photos. And I was like, really? Can't I just hide behind the shell or hide behind the whatever it might be? And you said, no, you need to be at the front and centre of that. So then I started finally putting myself in a few of those, sort of photos. And then I wasn't doing them very often because it wasn't natural. I'm not a, I talk. Like, that's usually how I communicate. And so once we discovered that, okay, maybe I need to do little videos instead of me doing the pictures and then writing the blurb about it, that was actually easier for me. But I made a rule for myself: if I don't do that video in 2 takes, then I don't do it, because otherwise it's not natural for me. And even then, it still feels very, ugh. Do I have to do this? But you make me. And so when you said to me, oh, look, if you do this podcast, you don't have to do those social media videos anymore because I'll just take grabs from the podcast. So you sold it to me that way.
Yeah, I did.
But then what have you told me you have to do this afternoon?
Some social media.
So he tricked me.
Well, I've realised that just taking clips from this show is not enough. What we actually need to do is both. So take some clips from the show and actually just do some videos specific for social media. But I think that you did have to be really vulnerable, didn't you?
I felt like an idiot, because I felt like, who am I to do this? Or the other thing is, I follow a lot of people, and I also hear when they get so much criticism. They might say the wrong thing or not state the right fact correctly or whatever it might be. But people can be vicious. Yeah. And look, I don't think we're big enough that our audience is, got all the trolls and all the rest of it. But it is still something where I think, gosh, even when I listened back to some of our podcasts, I'm like, why didn't I mention the window of tolerance? Or why didn't I mention... There's all sorts of things that I'll critique myself and think, did I explain that well? Or I could have added more things. But obviously in the moment we're just chatting and it's just whatever comes to me in that moment. I don't want it to be so prescribed, like I'm making sure all the facts are in every episode and I'm sitting here like it's an assignment. I want it to be more natural, but that obviously comes with those gaps, that I'm not going to cover everything.
Yeah, and you know my view on this. I think that's totally fine. Like, this is not a show where, you know, we're reading a textbook. You know, we're chatting and we're going to try and give some good advice. And you also know my thoughts on the whole trolls thing, which I do get because, you know, believe it or not, my DJ channel is big enough where I have been trolled a few times. People saying that I'm rubbish and can't mix and all that sort of stuff. And I always sort of say, if you're brave enough to be out on the field playing, then those people sitting in the crowd giving you stick, those people don't deserve that. Why should they have the right to criticize you? That's how I say it. You have to be really, really brave to get out there on the field and play. And that's what we're doing with this show, is we're getting out on the field and we're playing. And if people most of the people in the audience are going to love it. And then occasionally some idiot is going to come and criticize us. But what's he doing? Or she?
Yep.
Or they? Well, before we jump into your story, the other thing, and I sort of kind of did ask this before, but I'll ask it in a different way. I think people are fearful of being vulnerable because maybe they are scared that it's going to be too much, or they're going to be too emotional. Like, actually, for any older people who love Seinfeld, there's an episode of Seinfeld where George, he opens up totally to Jerry, and Jerry just kind of backs away and goes, I think you scared me straight. And basically what he was saying is, it's too much information. I don't want all of that from this friendship.
Yeah.
So how do people deal with that? How do they know who the right person to talk to or be vulnerable is?
I think maybe it's doing little baby steps towards that. Like, maybe if you shared something that wasn't so personal with somebody and it felt safe, it felt comfortable, they responded, you know, kind of appropriately, or they followed up with you about that, that would feel like a safe person. You know, they seemed invested because they followed up on the story and they showed concern because they checked in on you. That could be a good person, you know, that you can open up.
Yep.
But you do need to start testing out who those people are in your life, because if you don't have them, then when things get tough, it's going to be really, really, you know, more difficult for you to open up and share when you've never done that before, or you've rarely done that before.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example about that. I had a client once where she owned a cafe, and she said to me that people felt like they knew her because she would talk just very surface about her kids and just about life and the weather and whatever it is. But being a cafe, you've only got a couple of minutes. And so people would feel really connected to her and they would open up to her. She was a very good listener. And because she would deflect a little bit where, you know, she'd answer their question but pass it straight back to them and ask them a deeper question, they felt like they had a really deep connection with her. But she came to see me because she'd had a bit of a wobble in her life, and she was actually feeling really lonely, and that she didn't have anyone that she could confide in. And as much as she had all of these connections and all these people around her, she didn't have anybody that she felt she could let her walls down and be vulnerable. But she'd never practiced that when things were going okay. So, yeah, that was a big scary step for her to take when things weren't going so well.
Yeah. I think I've mentioned on a previous show, I can't remember which episode, it was probably 2, where I was talking about anxiety, where I wouldn't open up to you. Like, I was one of those people that just kept everything inside when I was really struggling, and I was married to a counsellor and just never opened up. Which actually makes me think there's almost different types of vulnerability, because in that instance where I'm talking about me struggling mentally, you know, that's quite a really personal thing. But I guess I've also learned, like, one-on-one, like not opening up to anyone. I've almost gone a complete 180 now, and I talk about everything publicly.
Oh, yeah. I say to you all the time that vulnerability is your superpower.
Yeah.
You're really good at that.
Yeah. And I don't know if there was a switch at some point or it just happened gradually. Like, I'll do, obviously, you know, I've done a whole episode about me, but I'll do LinkedIn posts about various things. With my journey with filmmaking, I've been very open about the fact that I don't know what the F I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, that whole learning process, it was almost, because I guess it is related to ego a little bit.
Yeah, I think you've stopped worrying about judgment.
Yeah.
And you say that to me all the time. Like, I think you wanted to do something the other day, and I was like, oh, no, I'm not ready. I'm not in the whatever. And you said, oh, I just posted something to LinkedIn and I was only, I don't know what you said.
Oh, it was about my hairstyle.
You hadn't had a haircut in ages or something. And you're like, I don't even care. I just put it up there. So I'm not there yet.
Yeah, it was that. I had not had a haircut in a very, very long time. I had not brushed my hair. I looked like an absolute mess. But I had this idea of this little video I wanted to do for LinkedIn where I was celebrating the kids going back to school. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't be bothered going to the bathroom and doing my hair, so I just recorded this video at my desk because I actually thought, who wants to date me? Like, nobody's looking at my videos going, oh, he's a bit of all right, I wouldn't mind getting to know him a bit better. Like, so why do I care if people think, oh, his hair looks good or bad? Like, to me, it was totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I guarantee that 100% of people who watched that video didn't even notice.
Yeah. But I think that's what it is. You've stopped worrying about judgment.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that takes a bit of work.
Well, do you know what it actually comes down to? It's you owning you. You being okay with you.
And it's the fear of failure thing.
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing that held me back in life, was fear of failure, which is related to judgment, because fear of failure is, I don't want other people to judge me and say that I did a bad job, or that I was rubbish, or that, I'm not very good at making films, or can't run my own business, or whatever it is. And at some point, I can't tell you when that was, I let it go. And ever since I've let it go, and I know that a ton of podcasts talk about this, but it's real. Like, if you can let it go, because I always come back to, everybody is too busy thinking about themselves.
Yeah, that's true.
Nobody's thinking about me. Nobody's looking at that video going, oh, man, he didn't brush his hair. He didn't put some gel in his hair.
Or to be honest, if they do, it's a 2-second fleeting thought and they're on with the next.
Yeah.
That's not them later on going, oh my gosh, and how was Scott's hair this morning in that video? Like, they're not gonna be bothered with that.
Exactly. Okay. You ready?
I am.
All right, let's do it. So we've got maybe 5 or so big episodes of your life, things that have really impacted you and shaped who you are as a person. So why don't we start with the very first one, when you're about 4 and your parents get divorced, or separated and then divorced, obviously. Why don't you set the scene, and then I'll ask you some questions. Tell us about that time.
So initially when we first separated, my parents separated, my mum got a little tiny flat and had 4 kids in there. And then I'm not sure how long we stayed there. It was very, very short time. And then we moved into a rental. And I think my brother at that point then lived with my dad. And so I was 4, my brother would have been 11, my older sister would have been 13. And then how old would Meg have been?
6.
6, yep. No, 7.
All right, but you're the baby.
I'm
That's
the baby. Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, we moved into a rental, and my brother lived with my dad. And I remember he used to come and get us on a motorbike one by one. Like, he didn't. I don't think he had a car, because he used to come and get us on the motorbike. So I would go between the houses and things. And from memory, that was fine. Like, I don't really remember, that being really upsetting or terrible. From my memory.
Yeah.
But I think once I probably jump forward to probably at year 4. That's when I moved in with my dad. And that was because my mum built a house and it was very far away. And there wasn't any buses and, trains and things back then that would go into that area. And so I lived with my dad, and I moved schools quite a bit around my childhood, just with the rentals and things. But that was then my permanent primary school, and I stayed there. But it was a bit weird living with my dad when I'm, a girl, and my dad's a real gruff. Like, he's not like you. Like, I think you could raise girls easily, and you do raise our girls beautifully. But my dad's gruff.
We need to paint the picture. Obviously, I know him really well.
He's got a saying for every occasion.
Yes, yeah. I've never met someone who has so many puns and real ochre sayings. I'm trying to think if there's a character on TV that kind of... I don't think there is. He's kind of a one of a kind.
What's that Kath and Kim character when he does the... he's out in the bush. What's his...
Oh, you're talking about Russell Coit.
No, not. Oh, maybe, but a very mild version of where he's got a saying. He's got a.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a mix of lots of different people. But
And he's very stubborn, and he's very, he doesn't take any rubbish.
no. I wonder if we can start swearing on this, because it does not come naturally to me to not swear.
Says the boy that until he was 17 used to say flippin' heck. That was your swear words.
Yeah, a quick sidebar. I did not ever swear. And then suddenly when I hit year 12, I just thought, why have I stopped swearing? Why do I never swear? And then I started. Yeah. And I have not stopped since.
Yeah. Okay, so back to my childhood. So it seemed fine, but I did feel very different than my friends. I think I was one of the only people that I knew that had separated parents. Everyone had two family homes. And so the way that impacted me was my dad did a really good job of buying a house, well, actually it wasn't a house, it was a duplex, in a suburb that was a nice middle class suburb. Now, because of that, it meant that we probably had one of the cheaper houses in that whole suburb being a duplex, and I felt it.
Yeah.
So I think that he did a good job trying to get me into the good area where you go to a good school and, you know, you have a good mix of people that you're around and things, but it just meant that probably money was tight compared to if he had bought in a cheaper area. And then we always had terrible cars. Like, we had these big old Ford Falcons, and in our backyard we had this big driveway, and we used to say we were growing Valiants because we had two Valiants in the backyard that Dad used to use as parts. So they would just be in the backyard, and we would kind of just play in these half disintegrated cars and these in the backyard. So different than other people's families. And given that I lived with my dad, and he is not a person that worries about aesthetics. Like, our house was very basic. We probably had furniture that was hand-me-down. In fact, no, we did have furniture that was hand-me-down. There's no way those things were brand new. So our house was very different from other people's houses. It didn't have that same warm feeling of everything being coordinated. And in fact, this is a good example of my dad. My dad was he's an electrician by trade, but he was a bit of a handyman and could do everything. And then in our house, kind of like that whole, the mechanic never services their own car kind of thing. So people would come over and they would see that he's done the undercoat of the laundry, like, because maybe it was a bright colour and now he's put it white to try and tone it down before he paints it properly. And they'd go, "Oh, you're painting." And we'd be like, "Huh?" And we'd look at it and be like, "Oh, that's been like that for years." Or there'll be a patch of colour next to the light switch in the lounge room just to test if we like that colour. And same thing, be like that for a year.
Yeah.
But people would be like, "Oh, you're just doing something." And we wouldn't even notice it after a while because it's just been there for so long.
Yeah.
We used to have this lamp that it used to balance on its edge to maintain its structure. And every time a friend came over and they'd sort of do something, they'd bump that lamp and the whole shade would come smashing down and knock over the glasses underneath. They'd all be panicked thinking they've broken our lamp, and we're like, "Oh, nah," we just balance it back. Like, these are just normal for us.
So you're talking about this very lightheartedly and, with fond memories. And I know that you definitely know that your parents did a really good job in tough circumstances. But I also know there's a part of you that feels the shame.
Oh, there was huge shame, yeah.
Which is the part of being vulnerable.
Yeah, it was. Here's where my clients say to me, "You always make me cry."
Yeah.
I made myself cry. So, yeah, it was tough. I used to call my house half a house. If people used to say, "Can I come to your house?" I'd say, "Yeah, you can come to my half a house."
Yeah.
And I'd literally call it half a house. And, I had friends with beautiful houses and pools and 2 stories and, they had lovely homes. And I had half a house. And then if I went to my mum's house, it was teeny tiny. It was so small. She bought this house that I don't even know how they legally allowed that to be so small. It was the tiniest house in the world. And so much so that I didn't even have a bedroom. It was 3 bedrooms, but my mum used my bedroom, I don't know, whatever for. But I used to share her bed when I would go there. And I actually cherish that now. Like, my mum is very spiritual, and I think that's where I learned a lot of my spirituality from. And even I remember back in the day, she'd be watching a show or reading a book about aliens and things, and she'd be writing into a current affair when they say, "Would you like more information?" And you get the newsletter, back before the internet. So she really opened me up to a lot of concepts that my dad didn't.
Yeah.
My dad, when I look at it, he gave me a lot of strength of character. My mum's a very soft, gentle person. And I think if I had been raised solely by my mum, I probably would be a bit of a pushover. Like, we laugh about the things that happened to my mum in terms of tradesmen trying to rip her off.
Well, even the fact that you didn't mention one important fact about this house. It didn't have glass windows. It had plastic windows. Perspex.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how that happens.
I don't either, no. And even like when she altered, so the height of the kitchen benches when she was building, no one told her that she needs to raise the height of the stove, so that was on bricks. Like, everything was just haphazard and not finished. Yeah. But my mum was so proud of that house because it was hers, and she didn't get asked to move from, being in rentals anymore. So she had her piece of home and grounding and stuff. So that was really lovely. But because of the distance from where I lived, from my dad, if I went there for the weekend, I was very isolated from my friends. I would, and obviously back then we didn't have the internet when we grew up.
Yeah.
So I would just go there for the weekends, and my mum didn't have very much money. So, it was pretty basic. And obviously now, again, I look back and I go, wow, they did a great job of trying to just make sure we had everything that we did. But it certainly wasn't the same as my friends that I had at the time.
So did you feel less than?
Definitely. And in fact, when we talk about behaviours that come from childhood, for me, and my friends do this as well, so it's not just solely from my background, but we are very big on making sure we pay our way. And in fact, when we first started dating, I remember shoving you out the way so many times to pay the bill because I just never wanted to feel like I'm less than or that I couldn't pay my way. So it ended up being a behaviour where I was too much that way. And almost, if I'm around the wrong people, I could be taken advantage of. Luckily, my friends are also like that, and we sort of all, behave the same way. But yeah, if you've got a friend that stands back from the till every time, you're like, okay, I need to look at that.
No, you are. You're still like that to this day, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think it's kind of shaped who you are?
It's definitely made me appreciate things. Like I definitely appreciate furniture. I definitely appreciate our home being nice.
Yeah.
I like a tidy home. I think back then we were responsible for cleaning up, so there probably would have been a lot of clutter, because kids don't really care. But yeah, I like having a tidy home, and I like having things, nicely done. In fact, I kind of almost have a rule for myself that if I was buying chairs, for example, if I couldn't afford the ones that I want, I'd rather wait.
Yeah.
Because if I buy something crappy in the meantime to kind of hold its place, I'll never replace that.
Yes.
That lamp in that lounge room showed me you just get used to stuff and it just becomes, you don't even see it anymore.
Yeah. And I got a few questions for you. Like, did you ever, like, obviously you felt shame. Did you ever try and hide that?
Yeah, so when we had the Valiants and the Ford Falcons and things like that, they were always terrible cars. I would make my dad park up the street from the school if he was dropping us off from school so that people wouldn't see me get out that car.
Yeah.
Same with if I was going to a party and things, I probably would want to be not dropped off right out the front. In fact, I remember my brother, so I used to work at Chicken Treat, and being my brother's 7 years older, he got his first car and it was a Holden Commodore. So it was the nicest car in the family. Yeah. And when he picked me up from work, I was so proud. I was so happy to get in that car. Like he was proud too. We were all proud. Yeah. But it was a different feeling. Like I loved it when Brendan took me somewhere in that car.
Do you see traces of your sort of childhood shame showing up in adult life? Like a couple of examples I've got is like people pleasing, or like, is there anything that you think?
Well, I think I didn't really realise this until a few years ago, but being that I was the youngest, and actually in my childhood, my sister got to about, I think it was year 7, and she had a falling out with my mum, which we never knew for years later what the actual falling out was, but it turned out my mum didn't take her to a little athletics competition because she was getting the rest of us kids ready, and she said, can you go with the neighbour that's going? And my sister got really upset by that and actually ran off and didn't go to the competition, and she went to my dad's house, and then she lived with my dad from there on.
Jeez.
Yeah, and my mum never knew that was the catalyst. I mean, that was one of the things. It would have been other things that she probably was feeling around the time, but I do think that because she went to my dad's house around the time that my dad was still hurt and processing the separation, I love you, Dad, but I'm going to say this, I think he would have probably vented about my mum a lot. I think he would have shared lots of things that would have sort of cemented my sister's, you know, frustrations and annoyance with my mum. And she literally didn't talk to my mum for up until her early 20s, up until her 20s.
Yeah.
And so she would literally call her Tracy's mother. So she'd say, Tracy, your mother's on the phone, or I'm not going to Tracy's mother's house, or she would always just refer to her as Tracy's mother. So I think that I realised I played a very joining role in the family. Like I was the one that was on good terms with everybody, and I felt like I kind of had to smooth things over all the time. So I do think that I carry that role into adulthood, where I make sure everyone's okay. And even in friendships, we've talked about that in one of our episodes about how I used to always include everybody and make sure I was the organiser. And that was definitely stemming from those childhood years of feeling like I was the only one in the family that cared for everybody.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like you've processed it all? Because I know one of the things, and we've talked about this in a previous episode, where you carried that picture around of little Tracy, which was around about this age when you were living in this house. Because I kind of want to relate it back to listeners who might be relating to some of the stuff that you're talking about. Is how do you work your way through that when you're an adult and you start to piece those things together?
So definitely my breath work and my meditations have helped with that, because sometimes one of those things will just pop up, you know, in those journeys, and you can see it from a different lens. My clients do it with EMDR, where they'll go back to a childhood memory and see how that's linked in, you know, with something. I'll give you an example of that just so you can see how we do work through this younger stuff. I had a client where she wanted to work on why she was crossing her own boundaries. And I said to her, okay, can you give me an example of that? And she said, okay, well, many times, my ex-boyfriend used to want to drink, and because that would always go pear-shaped, you know, they had the boundary that he wasn't going to drink around her. But it would always end up being crossed, that boundary. Anyway, so we started at that, just one round of the EMDR, and her brain straight away went to childhood and gave me examples about how when her parents were fighting, she would be feeling really uncomfortable, really unsafe, really worried, and they would be saying everything's fine. So she then jumped around to about 5 or 6 different other examples where this same sort of theme was taking place, where what I'm feeling is different than the messages I'm being told by other people. So it makes perfect sense that this little girl learnt, okay, what I'm feeling mustn't be valid. I need to listen to what other people are telling me because that's actually more accurate. So that was directly linked to those childhood experiences. So I think what she did was clever. Why do I keep doing this? And then we traced it back. And you've obviously seen a few times where, you know, I've had those tracing backs where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was from that particular situation or experience. Because when we go through things, and this doesn't matter if we're kids or adults, we just get through it.
Yeah.
At that moment, we're not processing. We are just getting through, surviving, one foot in front of the other, that kind of thing. But then most people don't go, oh, let me look back at that shit time and let me process all of that or think about it. We just want to get through it. We just want to move forward. And so in childhood, when we don't really have all those resources and skills to be able to, you know, look at the bigger picture and process things, we just move through it. And so it's only now, even me now in my, you know, mid to late 40s, that I'm actually going back and doing that. And I think even hormones can definitely do that as well, like shifting things up where it makes you look at stuff from your past.
Yeah. And if anyone hasn't listened to the episode, we have a whole episode devoted to how childhood affects everything. So if you haven't listened to that and some of this is resonating with you, go back and check out that episode because there's lots of really good stuff in there. Mm-hmm. I do have one last question. And I know you kind of do this anyway, but I think it's good for people to hear it. If you could go back to that little Tracy, because I know you do.
I do it all the time.
All right. Well, I was going to say, what would you say to her? But the question is, what do you say to her?
I thank her for going through all those things for me. She taught me so much. And she was brave.
Yeah. Sorry, darling, I'm making you upset.
Yeah.
If you're just listening, Tracy's, tearing up.
Yeah, she did a good job. She went through a lot.
Well, she was about to go, well, not about to. We're moving on to when you were 19.
It was actually before that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when I worked at Chicken Treat, I met my very first love, and he was a manager, and we started dating. And I really fell hard for my first love. And really quickly into our relationship, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month or something, he found out that a person that he previously had, they didn't even date, they just used to hook up at the end of a night, kind of here and there. But she found out she was pregnant and she was going to keep the baby. So here I was, 17.
How old was he?
He was 21. He was
And just
40.
say his name. You haven't said his
Oh,
name.
Jason. So yeah, Jason was 21, and then he was cool. He had the cool car. He had a cool vibe about him. Had good energy. Like everyone loved Jason that worked with him, and I felt really lucky, to be dating him and being an older guy and everything. And so I was really proud of this relationship and really fell hard for him. But yeah, he was having to navigate a person being pregnant while we were dating. So her belly's getting bigger. He's having to go to appointments with her. He's having to, kind of be part of that whole process, which I wasn't jealous of in terms of worrying that he was going to, break up with me and end up with her. That was never a part of it. But there was a lot of jealousy in terms of, this is a really exciting time in someone's life when a baby's coming into it. I mean, they were very young, but it's still an exciting time and it's still very special. And he was doing that with somebody else. And I remember, so I went through the pregnancy. Well, not I went through. He got through the pregnancy, and she gave birth, and I went to the hospital with him. And I remember everyone being in the hospital room and all of them congratulating, the mum and saying how great a job she did, and just, it was a lovely, cherished moment. And he was getting congratulations as well. And I'll say this because it's my 17-year-old self, not myself now, but I remember just thinking, this is crass, but I'll just bleep it out. You had sex without a condom. How clever are you? Like, they were all saying how clever she was to give birth, but in my head I'm like, yeah, so clever.
Yep.
So I wasn't feeling the same joy as everybody else. I was having big emotions.
Yep. So
I remember running out the corridor and running away from the hospital, and my boyfriend followed me. I had a head start, so he couldn't really catch up with me, and he had driven us both there, and so I didn't want to go home with him. I just knew that I just wanted to be alone. I just jumped onto the first bus that I saw, and I just knew that it eventually would get to a train station so I could get myself home. But I remember speaking to my mum afterwards, and she said, "You're so young to go through this. Like, people go through this in their 30s where they're dealing with like exes with babies and all of these emotions that come with that."
You're just a kid.
I was just 17. Yeah, so it was big. So the reason why I'm also sharing that is when I'm doing my breathwork journeys, like when I was doing my psychedelic training in Sydney and they did a day of breathwork, I went back to that. It just came up in my breathwork and I sat beside myself on the bus.
Take your time, Dave.
I just told her how brave she was and that it was a lot. I just acknowledged everything that she was feeling. And in the breathwork journey, I was sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and releasing all the energy, from that time. But I was also holding myself and I was just loving on her. For anyone that's not my client, I always talk in third person when I'm referring to our younger self, just because it's easier to kind of see it from a different perspective and, see what I went through at that time. So that was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, obviously from there we had to navigate, custody things where, because he was a newborn, he didn't get as much custody as what a normal relationship probably would have. We dated for a year, and then my sister had moved out of home and she had 2 roommates. And then I think one of the roommates was moving out and she suggested that Jason move in. So he did. And then during that time, one of the roommates, she used to have a best friend come over all the time. And because Jason was living there and the best friend was over all the time, they ended up getting close, and then they started a relationship behind my back. And so he cheated on me. And so then, obviously once I found out he cheated, and then he broke up with me, but then they started dating. Now, remember, he's still my manager at Chicken Treat. So he used to come to Chicken Treat driving her car. So I've got the heartbreak of losing my first love,
Yeah.
knowing he's cheated on me, so all those yucky feelings, but then it's smack in my face with him driving her car. So as soon as I'd arrive at work, I would see her car, and then sometimes she'd come in to visit, you know, all of those things. And I look back and I go, oh my God, again, I was just such a little baby. I was only 18 at that point.
And I know that, and we're only halfway through this story, it taught you so much.
Oh, so much.
And because the thing I want to get across to listeners is how you use all of that now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a bit about that?
More so with the next bit.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, those things are, I look back and I honour myself, you know, for what
Tell me what that looks like.
just acknowledging the range of emotions that I had that my friends didn't have. Like, you got to remember, you know, being 17 and 18, I'm literally the only person I know going through that. And yeah, it was hard. But I let myself feel it. I let myself cry, like at the time. So I think I did a good job of talking to my mum about it.
Yeah.
And again, that's opening up and being vulnerable and sharing that with my mum. So my mum was probably the person that I was really vulnerable with around those things.
Yeah.
And she definitely met me exactly where I was at. Like she always is beautiful with that.
Yeah.
So then what happens is we're obviously separated, and he's, you know, in a new relationship. And I'm not sure how much longer that goes on for, maybe another, actually it would have been less than a year. But during their relationship, at some point he reaches back out to me and we start having sort of communication at first. And then he gets a motorbike and he wanted to show me his motorbike and take me out for a ride. So we did that. We ended up sleeping together again, which, again, this is my 17, or I think I was 18 by that point. My 18-year-old self did not feel bad about that. She did not care that he was cheating on that other girl, because I felt like, well, you did that to me.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm explaining that is because that attached me back up to him. Remember, he's my first love, so every time I saw his phone on my name on my phone, I would be really excited. I don't know that I wanted to get back together with him, to be honest, but I definitely had that connection and that want to be around him quite strongly. So anyway, this one day, it was literally a week after I'd seen him and we'd spent time together. I was at Chicken Treat just on a normal Sunday morning shift, and so Jason's brother had a friend that worked at Chicken Treat too. He was only young. He was only a young kitchen hand, maybe about 13, or no, he couldn't be 13, he'll be 14. And he says to me, because he thinks we're broken up, no one knows that we've been catching up and connecting again. So he just says to me, kind of like off the cuff, he goes, oh, did you hear about Jason? And I said, no, what happened? He goes, oh, he died last night.
Wow.
And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, he died. And he said his brother had told him. And so obviously that's a massive shock, and I'm at work. So I go into the office and I say, can I ring his parents? And I remember just them saying, yes, love, it's true.
Jeez.
Yeah. So what had happened was on his new motorbike, which was too big for him, he hadn't done the stages. You're supposed to get the smaller bike first. He just went straight to the bigger bike. And one day by this point he was living with that girl. They'd moved out together, and he'd left home to go and get something from the shops, and on his motorbike. But anyway, he smashed into a tow truck and died automatically or instantly.
Jeez.
Yeah. So there I was at Chicken Treat and hearing this news. So the manager says to me, you know, obviously go home. So I lived with my dad, and I went home and I was sitting in my bed, and my dad comes in and he said, oh, honey, what's wrong? And I said, Jason died. Now, to my dad's defence, he didn't know we were back in contact, so he might have just thought it was just an ex-boyfriend that I was kind of over. But he gave some sort of like, oh, honey, or that's no good, or something very...
Yeah, trying his best.
Oh, yeah, my dad's, you know, this is not his strength. So he tried his best to sort of say, oh, you know, the right sounds and bits, but then this will always make me laugh. He was having friends come over, and obviously I was supposed to be at work. And he said, oh, do you want to come in the kitchen and make a salad? I was like, nope, I don't think I want to make a salad. So he he wasn't the best for that, but my mum was amazing.
Yeah.
So for a period of time, I just bawled my eyes out. Like, when I say period of time, not just that day, but, you know, for a lot of days.
And this is one of the things you're most proud of your younger self.
I'm so proud of her.
Is how you processed all this. Because the other complexity is the state of your relationship. Like,
I wasn't the girlfriend.
You weren't the girlfriend.
Yeah. Luckily, his family were beautiful and they loved me. So I was very much embraced and brought into the grieving process. In fact, so much so that, and again, I can't believe how young I was, I saw his body.
Yeah.
Like, his sister said that she'd seen him in the morgue, or someone had said that they seen him in the morgue and they found it really helpful. So I thought, okay, well, maybe that will be helpful. It was not. It was not helpful. So I went to the morgue and he was laying there with a sheet over him and he had a big gash on his cheek. And he had long blonde hair and that was still the same. It was past his shoulders. And all I could manage was to touch his hair. And it was cold. And I'm 18.
Yeah.
Like, I think about Tommy, that's like 2.5 years away.
Yeah.
I would not want Tommy seeing a dead body in 2.5 years. So that was really hard. And, you know, then we had the funeral and, you know, the wake and all the rest of it. And I think everyone just feels like you're waiting for those moments to be done to get on with life. And for a lot of people that is the case. And so this is the learnings that I've done myself to know that, you know, for my clients, it doesn't end there. That grieving process goes on for a long time.
I know because you've told me how proud of your younger self you are of how you manage that grieving process. Tell me a bit about that.
So I remember I used to, because I lived with my dad, I didn't really have my own space, you know, to really feel like I could let out all my emotions. So my car was my sanctuary. And I remember driving to my mum's house and I would just play the music that reminded me of him. He used to love the song Eye of a Tiger. That was definitely his song. And then he loved Meatloaf and we used to listen to Meatloaf together. And so those are the things that I used to play and I used to bawl my eyes out. And I used to just let it all out in the car. And this is where I can relate to people that want to end it all. Like, there was times where I just wanted to drive into a tree. Like, it would just feel like it was all too much.
Yeah.
But obviously I didn't. So it was just releasing all of that. It was just feeling so much. It was such a big emotions. And again, my mum was so beautiful with that. And luckily, I was quite spiritual because a few things happened that really cemented my spirituality. And even though I probably was a little bit inactive around that space, you know, in my 30s, I think my 20s, because of his death, I was very connected. So one of the things that happened was when I was driving along a main road, a light would just go off. And I would just have the thought where I'm like, if that's you, Jason, turn it back on. And it would go back on. It happened to me about 4 times. And then I used to do it all the time. And then I was like, Tracy, you're just making a game out of it. But it happened enough times that that I did actually really make that association. And now, even though I was 18, I'd already been to a clairvoyant at this point. So they weren't new to me. But I went and saw a clairvoyant. And she said to me, there's someone that's been waiting here all day. And, you know, sometimes I think, oh, they might always say that. But anyway, she said, he's been showing me pictures of tall trees, or he's been showing me tall trees, like not just tall trees, but really, really tall trees. So for her, she almost didn't want to tell me that because it seemed quite vague, or it seemed like, why would that be relevant in any way? But for me, that really was confirmation that he was coming through, because the only holiday that we'd ever had together, again, we're 17 and, you know, 21, was in Pemberton. Now, Pemberton, for those that don't live in WA, is a little country town, you know, down the southwest of Western Australia that is full of big, is it jarrah trees? Or?
I think so. And that's ultimately, whenever anyone says the word Pemberton, you just
think of the trees. Yeah, that's what they're famous for. That little town is famous for those tall trees. So she couldn't have summed it up, you know, more perfectly. And the other thing that she did give me, and this is where people go, they read your mind or they read your body language or whatever. I definitely don't agree with that because of this, well, from many experiences, but this is one of them. She knew, obviously, that he'd passed, but she said to me the way that he died, she was touching her heart. Now, from my understanding at that point, and this was probably a couple of months after his death, but I think autopsies and things and reports take a long time, so I hadn't known the results of those. She told me, I thought he died of a broken neck once he'd hit the tow truck and fallen off his motorbike, but she was saying it was his heart. Anyway, so I was in my head thinking, no, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong. But when I spoke to his family and told them about the reading that I'd had, they said, actually, we've got the autopsy report and he actually died because his rib snapped and speared his heart.
Jeez.
So she was totally accurate.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's many times where I got, lots of confirmations like that. But what also used to happen is for years, I'm talking years, maybe 3 years, every time something significant happened in my life or I'd be out somewhere, in random places, Eye of a Tiger would play. And my friends would know, and I would get goosebumps. If it came on where I felt like it was from him, I would get goosebumps. There was occasions where I'm like, I think I caught that song and I didn't have a physical reaction. But the times where I got goosebumps, like we could be in a pub where they don't even play that type of music, and all of a sudden the band would play that, and my friends would like run to me because they knew, and we'd always be like, "There's no way this band would normally play this song, but tonight they are." So there was just lots of things that I felt he was always around. But one of the most significant experiences was I'd gone to I have friends that are twins, and they lived out of home from quite a young age, and I remember going and staying with them, and I was sleeping over this one day, and when you wake up and it's kind of like that twilight feeling where you're not quite awake but you're not quite asleep but your eyes aren't open yet?
Yeah.
I remember laying there in that really, really relaxed state, and Jason came to me in my mind's eye. And I literally gasped. I don't know if I did it out loud, but I do know that I felt that feeling of like, what are you doing here? Or you shouldn't be here. That was the feeling I got. And then instantly I had this feeling come over me where I thought, don't show him you're frightened or he'll leave. So I tried to calm myself down, and he just hugged me. But I knew that this was an experience. Like, I know that lots of people would say that was just a dream or that was but unless you've had that experience, like for me, you can't shake me off that. I don't care what you tell me. I've had that lived experience. To me, that was something I can't explain, but he came to me. And like only that once, I've never had that again. But it was pretty special, and it's really cemented my view.
So that obviously helped with the grieving process. I
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah, and also, do you know what? I used to write poetry.
Yes, I know.
Around
I
that.
know this story.
Yeah.
You should tell it.
What do you mean about the poetry?
Well, you wrote the poem.
Oh, yeah.
You're so proud of that
Oh,
poem.
this poem. Okay, well, maybe I'll say this poem. Maybe we can cut it if I don't like it. But after that, this kind of gave me my belief system. It just came to me. It just poured out of me one day. And I always know that if something's pouring out of me, I don't want to say it's channeled, but I don't feel like it's from me. I feel like it's been given to me in some way. So my poem was, and again, I'm 18 writing this, we are all just spirits here. It's the earth that's make-believe. We're each only here for a little while, and then it's time for us to leave. But we will all meet again in a different time and place, and we'll recognise the soul beneath, a different body and a different face. Each time we live, we become wiser. Another layer is added to our soul. This earth isn't where it begins and ends. We're just acting out a role.
Beautiful.
And that was my little 18-year-old self. So I really poured myself into my poetry and writing. And once I ended up moving out of home, after I was 18, I remember laying on my lounge room floor and again playing music and just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. So I really feel like I did a good job of energetically releasing a lot of that grief. I think a lot of my clients, they can cry, initially when someone's died and maybe around the funeral, and then they almost don't give themselves the permission to keep that grieving process going, and they almost bottle it up and lock it away. And then when anniversaries and significant dates hit, they can be very overwhelmed and overcome with those emotions. Whereas again, that little Tracy, she chipped away at releasing all those emotions. So I didn't really ever feel overwhelmed on those dates because it just came when it came.
Yeah. And I think you have done such a good job in looking back at your younger self and being so proud of how she dealt with some really, really big life moments.
Yeah. And it's funny because I look at it now and I think, gosh, it was so full on, but yet I wasn't. And I thank whoever planned this, orchestrated this, even though I wouldn't have thought this at the time. Thank God I wasn't the primary girlfriend.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine being that primary girlfriend that was packing up his stuff and had been living in that house. And I'm so grateful that he cheated on me, which is one of those things where you don't know sometimes the things you're going through could be a blessing.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you take away from all that now? And
I take away that it's important to get your emotions out.
Yeah.
It's important to go back and process things. Like, again, I thought I did a really, really good job of releasing those emotions around the time of his death. And I probably did because when I go back in my breathwork journeys, I don't necessarily go back to his death. What I go back to is around the child and around the stuff that I probably just kept pushing through and maybe didn't release enough emotion around. So it is important that we go back because our body holds everything.
Mm.
There's a very famous book that most therapists would know called The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm.
And it's where we absorb everything. And if we don't, go back and process these things, they could be still sitting in our body.
You do an excellent job of that. And so that's what you would be preaching to listeners, right?
Yeah.
Is don't bottle it up, don't hold it
Yeah.
in.
And own your story too. Like,
Which is essentially being vulnerable, right? Owning your story, owning who you are.
yeah. And what you've been through and what you've learned from that or what
Yeah.
you're still learning from that.
Yeah. Very powerful. Well, you were extremely vulnerable.
I sure was.
Today.
For everyone that normally says about I make you cry, well, I did it to myself today, so you should all be very, very happy to be able to know that, yes, I do the work too.
I think that's why we wanted to do this episode, right? We've sort of tied it in. It's not all to do with being vulnerable, but we just sort of used your stories. It's obviously related to childhood and grief and trauma, and but all of it is wrapped up in this bow of you were super vulnerable today. And just because we have a podcast and we put ourselves out there doesn't mean we're perfect or have had these perfect lives. Like, things have happened to us, and we're not afraid to share it with people because we think it can help.
Yeah.
I think that was a pretty good summary.
Beautiful. You did well.
Is there anything that you would like to share before we wrap up? And we should point out, we had a feeling that this was going to be quite long, so we'll do a second episode, which is similar. We're going to talk about
What happened from there?
Yeah.
Kind of from there. Yeah, I always joke. I always say I had crazy 20s. I feel like my 30s and 40s, very stable, very settled, but all my life lessons really, well, not all, but a big chunk of my life lessons really seem to happen in those late teens and all through my 20s.
Yeah. Because you met me at 29.
Yeah, so luckily, that's what I thank my younger self for going through it. I'm like, I'd way rather go through those things than it be with Scott or with, anything that I want sort of more permanent. I'd much rather go through it when I'm young, even though I wouldn't have thought that at the time.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, well, should we wrap up this episode and then we can see you in a couple of weeks for the second part?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good job. I'm very proud of you.
Thanks.
I haven't done this for a while, so I've sort of forgotten what all the little out bits are. But yes, this is season 2. We are super proud of season 1, and if you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen to some of those episodes. Simple things you can do to help us out and help us get this show in front of more people is hit the like button or leave a comment. We've finally figured out people can leave comments on Spotify, not just YouTube, so I make sure I check those and we respond to them. Shoot us an email. You can join. We read all the emails that get sent to us, which you can do via tracyquayle.com, which is where you can also join our newsletter, which we send out once a fortnight as well. And then finally, just follow Tracy on social media because we're going to be doing some new videos.
Because he's making me.
So that is at tracyquayle.therapy. Okay, until the next time, thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.